At her wedding, my daughter called me the help. Her in-laws mocked my clothes. I stayed silent until I took the mic and made one announcement that left them all pale. Can you imagine sitting there, watching your own daughter introduce a complete stranger as her father to 350 wedding guests, while you, her actual dad, the man who just paid $500,000 for this fairy tale, are tucked away at table 18? That night, I learned that some betrayals don't just sting. They shatter everything you thought you knew about love and family. And what happened next? Well, let's just say those Greenwich socialites got a lesson they'd never forget from a simple plumber in a borrowed tuxedo. My name is Jim Hayes, and that night, June 15, 2024, at the opulent Ashford Estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, I felt like a ghost at my own daughter's wedding. I'd pulled my Ford F-150 into a valet line filled with Bentleys, and the kid looked at my truck like I'd brought a dead fish to dinner. My rented tux felt like a costume, an $89 disguise among bespoke suits that cost more than my monthly mortgage. But I knew the difference between true quality and mere pretense, because I'd spent 30 years building a business from the ground up. Inside, the crystal chandeliers, each worth more than my first car, sparkled over a sea of Connecticut's elite. And there was Victoria, my daughter, my beautiful girl, in a $32,000 Vera Wang gown. She floated through the crowd, saw me, and her eyes, they just slid away. A wedding planner, clipboard in hand, led me to table 18, the Siberia of wedding seating. Right by the kitchen door, where the sound system buzzed and the catering staff rushed. The table for relatives you have to invite but don't want to explain. That's me, I said, a bitter taste in my mouth. Meanwhile, Victoria was at table 1 center stage with her new family, the Whitmores. Preston Whitmore Sr., owner of half of Fairfield County, a man whose money was old when my grandpa was still farming. I watched her, my heart aching. When guests asked about her family, she'd point to table 1, smiling. My father's right over there, she'd say, gesturing to a distinguished, silver-haired stranger, Richard Morrison. I'd never seen the man in my life. My table filled with plus ones and distant cousins, nice enough, but not the kind who made the society pages. We made small talk about the weather, the beautiful venue. Nobody asked what I did. Probably for the best, I thought, a raw edge of anger beginning to simmer inside me. 26 years. 26 years of scraped knees, bedtime stories, dance recitals I never missed. Well, almost never. A few emergency plumbing calls, sure, but I always made it up to her. I paid for her private school when she struggled, $14,000 a year for Fairview Academy. Yale for years, $68,000 each. Her Manhattan apartment after graduation, $3,000 a month for 2 years. And now, this wedding. Every last detail. The $180,000 venue, the $85,000 catering, the $28,000 flowers, the New York Philharmonic Quartet for $15,000. Every single cent. But in her rush to become a Greenwich socialite, Victoria had forgotten one crucial detail. Every contract had my signature. Every payment came from my company. And I was holding the final check for $340,000, the one that would keep her perfect reception running. The cocktail hour dragged on. Every smile Victoria directed at the Whitmores, every pose for the cameras, felt like a knife twisting in my gut. If I stayed silent, I'd lose more than money. I'd lose my self-respect. Let me tell you about Hayes Plumbing and Property Solutions. Started in '94 with a used van and a toolbox. 16-hour days, 7 days a week, for 5 years straight. Lived on peanut butter sandwiches. But I didn't just fix pipes. I paid attention. I listened. When that lawyer with the leaking faucet mentioned he was selling his building, I bought it. Fixed it up, rented it out. Bought another and another. Now, 23 locations. Last year's revenue? $8.9 million. Net worth? The same. Victoria knew none of this. To her, I was just the guy who came home with dirty hands, who embarrassed her at parent-teacher conferences because I wore work clothes. The guy who wasn't sophisticated enough for her Yale friends. She had no idea her simple plumber dad owned more property than half the people in this room. Staying quiet meant accepting her shame. It meant letting her build a marriage on lies. It meant teaching her that family loyalty was negotiable based on social status. The thought made my blood run cold. I reached into my jacket pocket, feeling the folded bank statements, the contracts, the email threads with the wedding planner, 23 messages over 4 months, all addressed to Mr. Hayes and copied to Victoria. She knew exactly who was paying for this fairy tale. My attorney, Richard Poulson, sat 3 tables away. He thought I was paranoid bringing him. "Jim," he'd said, "she's your daughter. This is just wedding stress." But Richard hadn't sat at table 18 while his daughter erased him. Catherine Brooks, the venue manager, kept glancing my way. She knew. She knew whose signature was on the contracts. She knew I was the client. If I challenged Victoria tonight, I'd force her to choose. Her new family or her real one. The lie she'd constructed or the truth she was running from. But if I didn't challenge her, I'd be teaching her that love without respect was enough. That she could take everything I'd given her and give nothing back. My phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. "Daddy, please don't mention the plumbing business tonight. This is important to me. 30 years of sacrifice, reduced to an embarrassment to be managed." I looked around the room, at the crystal, the gold, the flowers that cost more than most people's annual salaries. At my daughter, ashamed of the very qualities that made all this possible. The decision crystallized in that moment, sharp and clear. Some lessons, I realized, can only be taught the hard way. 7:15 p.m. The cocktail hour was in full swing, and the social ecosystem was revealing itself in all its polished cruelty. 3 guests, people I'd worked with over the years, approached my table. Margaret Henderson, whose flooded basement I'd fixed, Dr. James Walsh, whose medical building we'd renovated, Sarah Chin, whose restaurant plumbing I'd handled on Christmas Eve. "Jim Hayes," Margaret exclaimed. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Father of the bride," I said simply. Her expression shifted, confusion, then dawning understanding, then sympathy. Oh my. Victoria never mentioned. "She keeps her private life private," I interjected, but it was too late. Margaret's voice had carried. Nearby conversations paused. Heads turned. The whispers started. "That's the plumber. Victoria's father?" "I thought he was. Didn't she say he passed away?" Within minutes, the stories spread like spilled wine on white linen. Faces changed. Surprise, awkwardness. A few looked genuinely sorry for me. Most just looked uncomfortable. Preston Whitmore Sr. noticed the commotion. He approached my table with the confident stride of a man who'd never been denied anything. "You must be Jim," he said, extending a manicured hand. "Preston Whitmore. Victoria's told us so much about you." A polite lie. Victoria had told them nothing. "Have we met before?" he continued. "You look familiar." "I fixed your kitchen pipes last March," I said. "Emergency call Sunday morning. You were hosting a charity brunch." His smile flickered, just for a second, then returned, more forced. "Ah, yes. Well, you do excellent work." "Thank you." Victoria is fortunate to have such a practical father. Practical. Not successful. Not accomplished. Practical. Like a tool you keep in the garage. He patted my shoulder, a gesture both condescending and dismissive, and moved away. But the damage was done. The entire room now knew. The bride's father was the help. I watched Victoria across the room. She'd seen the conversation, heard the whispers. Her face flushed red, then went pale. She said something sharp to Preston III, who immediately looked in my direction, his gaze assessing, calculating if I posed a threat to his perfect evening. The string quartet played Pachelbel's canon. Champagne flowed. White orchids from Hawaii filled the air. But the mood had shifted. What began as elegant anticipation now had a tension humming beneath it. Guests kept glancing between my corner table and Victoria's center stage position. The math didn't add up, and everyone knew it. Catherine Brooks, the venue manager, appeared at my elbow. "Mr. Hayes, is everything all right?" Professional concern. She knew. She understood the delicate dynamics. "Everything's perfect, Catherine. If you need anything at all, please let me know immediately." She understood. Preston 3 made his way over to me next. Harvard MBA, trust fund baby, never earned a callus. His handshake was weak. Sir, he said, I want to thank you for raising such an incredible woman. She is incredible, I agreed. Victoria mentioned that you've had some challenges over the years. Challenges. Like working for a living was a character flaw. We all have challenges, I said. And, of course, but I want you to know that she'll never have to worry about money again. The Whitmore family takes care of our own. Our own. Like Victoria had been adopted out of poverty. That's generous of you. I said. Family is everything to us. Blood or otherwise. The insult was subtle, unmistakable. She'd never truly be one of them. She'd always be the girl they rescued from working-class obscurity. Preston 3 smiled, a shark smile, and returned to his table. But I noticed something he'd missed. My attorney was already walking toward the stage. Victoria caught my eye. Just for a moment, our gazes locked. I saw fear there. Not social anxiety, but real fear. The kind that comes when your carefully constructed world is about to crumble. She'd built this new life on lies. Traded her family's love for social acceptance. Chosen status over substance. But she'd forgotten the most important rule of any transaction: always know who holds the real power. And tonight, she was about to learn that power isn't inherited. It's earned. My phone buzzed again. This time, Catherine Brooks. Final payment confirmation required by 9 p.m. I glanced at my watch. 8:45. The ceremony would start in 15 minutes. Victoria's perfect timeline. But timelines change quickly when you're the one holding the checkbook. Richard Polson caught my eye, tapped his briefcase. Contracts. Bank statements. Emails. The paper trail that proved who was making this fairy tale possible. Preston Whitmore Sr. was holding court near the bar, bragging about his new yacht. $2 million for something he'd use 6 weekends a year. But old money makes assumptions. They assume that because they've always had wealth, they understand how wealth works. They assume social connections are business relationships. They assume a working-class man in a borrowed tuxedo poses no real threat. Tonight, they were about to learn the difference between having money and controlling it. The ceremony was about to begin. Victoria's moment of triumph. But every perfect moment depends on someone keeping the lights on. And I was the one holding the switch. 8:45 p.m. dinner service was in full swing. The mood had shifted from cocktail tension to full-blown celebration. The ceremony had been flawless. Victoria, radiant. Preston 3, playing his part. Even I had to admit, they looked good together. But the real test was about to begin. Preston Whitmore Sr. stood to give his toast. The room quieted. 350 guests turned to the head table. Crystal glasses caught the light from those $25,000 chandeliers. The moment was suspended, perfect, like a photograph from a society magazine. Friends, family, and honored guests, Preston Sr. began, his voice using old money and older privilege. Tonight, we celebrate not just the union of two young people, but the joining of two families. Polite applause, knowing smiles. Victoria, he continued, turning to my daughter, you have brought such joy to our family. Your grace, your intelligence, your character, these are the qualities that make us proud to call you our daughter. Our daughter. The words hit me like a physical blow. But I especially want to thank the man who raised you to be the remarkable woman you are today. Preston Sr. raised his glass, looking directly at Richard Morrison, the distinguished stranger at the head table. To Victoria's father, a man who embodies everything we admire about integrity and dignity. The room erupted. 350 people rose to their feet, glasses raised to a man who had never changed my daughter's diaper. Never stayed up all night when she had a fever. Never sacrificed a single thing for her happiness. Victoria beamed, radiant and grateful. She raised her own glass toward Morrison, mouthing, I love you, Daddy, for all to see. 26 years of fatherhood, erased with a single toast. Preston Sr. wasn't finished. Victoria often tells us how fortunate she is to have been raised by such a principled man. How his guidance shaped her into someone who understands the importance of family loyalty and doing what's right. His voice carried across the room with perfect projection. In a world where so many young people lack proper role models, Victoria had the blessing of a father who taught her the difference between class and mere wealth. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Richard Morrison, Preston Sr. continued, gesturing grandly, "Thank you for giving us the gift of your daughter. Tonight, we officially welcome her into the Whitmore family, knowing that the values you instilled in her will guide her for the rest of her life." The applause was thunderous. I watched as guest after guest turned toward Morrison, nodding approval, some wiping away tears at the touching tribute to fatherly love. No one looked at me. I sat at table 18, invisible in my borrowed tuxedo, watching my daughter accept praise for values I had taught her, while crediting a man she'd probably met 6 months ago. But then something interesting happened. Margaret Henderson, the guest I'd spoken to earlier, froze, her glass halfway to her lips. Dr. Walsh looked confused, glancing between Morrison and my corner table. Sarah Chin had stopped applauding entirely and was staring directly at me with growing outrage. They remembered. They knew who the real father was. And they weren't the only ones. Catherine Brooks stood near the kitchen entrance, her professional smile strained. She held her phone, probably checking on the final payment that still hadn't been processed. Her assistant managers flanked her, all three watching my table with barely concealed anxiety. The catering staff had paused their service to listen to the toast, but their supervisor kept glancing at his watch. 9 p.m. final payment deadline. They'd been told that service might be interrupted if certain conditions weren't met. Preston Sr. concluded his toast with a flourish. To Victoria and Preston, may their marriage be as blessed as the family that raised her. The room exploded in celebration. Guests surged toward Morrison to offer congratulations. Victoria hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face. Joy? Relief? I couldn't tell. But I noticed something else. David Chin from the Fairfield County Social Register stood near the exit with a photographer, both watching the scene with the intense focus of journalists who sensed a bigger story developing. Chen's phone was out, recording everything. Richard Polson had positioned himself near the stage, briefcase in hand. When our eyes met, he nodded once. Ready. My phone buzzed. A text from Catherine Brooks. Sir, we need to speak immediately. Payment issues. I stood up from table 18. The room was still celebrating. Glasses raised, people laughing. But a few guests noticed my movement. Margaret Henderson watched me with growing understanding. Dr. Walsh went pale, realizing what was about to happen. I walked slowly toward the stage, where Preston Sr. still basked in applause. Each step felt deliberate. Final. The point of no return. Victoria saw me coming. Our eyes met across the crowded room, and in that instant, I saw her recognize something in my expression she'd never seen before. Not disappointment. Not hurt. Resolution. Preston III stepped protectively closer to his new wife. Preston Sr. continued accepting congratulations, oblivious to the shift in energy around him. But Catherine Brooks was already moving, her team fanning out around the perimeter. The catering staff quietly stopped serving. David Chin raised his camera. Because sometimes, the truth has to be spoken loudly enough for everyone to hear it, even the people who don't want to listen. I reached the edge of the stage. Preston Sr. finally noticed me, his celebratory smile faltering slightly. He probably thought I was coming to thank him. He had no idea I was coming to introduce myself. I reached for the microphone. Excuse me, I said. The room didn't quiet immediately. Conversations continued. But those closest to the stage began to notice. A man in an ill-fitting tuxedo, approaching their microphone. Preston Sr.'s expression shifted from confusion to alarm. Sir, I'm not sure this is. My name is Jim Hayes, I said, my voice carrying across the room through the sound system. And I'm Victoria's father. The effect was immediate. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Glasses paused halfway to lips. 350 people stared at the man who had just disrupted their perfect evening. Victoria went white. Preston III stepped forward, probably planning to have me escorted out. But I held up my hand. For the past 30 minutes, you've been celebrating the wonderful father who raised my daughter. I gestured toward Richard Morrison, who looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. That man has never met Victoria before tonight. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I heard someone say, "Oh my God." Preston, I continued, looking directly at Whitmore Sr. I appreciate your kind words about integrity and values, but you directed them at the wrong person. Richard Pohl's son appeared at my side, briefcase open. He handed me a folder. Bank statements. Contracts. Email printouts. Evidence. This is the contract for tonight's venue, I said, holding up the papers signed by James Hayes. That's me. This is the catering agreement for $85,000. Also signed by James Hayes. The flowers contract for $28,000. The musician contract for $15,000. Every single vendor agreement for this evening. I could see faces in the crowd shifting from confusion to understanding. Margaret Henderson was nodding grimly. Dr. Walsh looked sick. The total cost of this wedding is $500,000. Every penny paid by Hayes Property Solutions. That's my company. Victoria found her voice. Daddy, please don't. Don't what? I asked, my tone still calm, but carrying more edge now. Don't tell the truth? Don't embarrass you? Don't exist? Preston Sr. stepped forward. Now see here. You can't I can't what? I retorted. Pay for my daughter's wedding? Because that's exactly what I did. I held up my phone, showing the banking app. This is the business account for Hayes Property Solutions. Current balance, $12.3 million. Tonight's wedding expenses, transferred in full. The room was dead silent. Even the catering staff had stopped moving. Hayes Property Solutions, I continued, is a company I built over 30 years. We started with residential plumbing and grew into commercial property management. 23 locations. $8.9 million in annual revenue. Not bad for a simple plumber. Catherine Brooks approached the stage, flanked by her assistant managers. Mr. Hayes, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. We need to discuss the final payment authorization. Perfect timing, Catherine. Of course. You need the final $340,000 before you can complete tonight's service. Preston Sr. looked confused. What final payment? Everything was arranged. Everything was arranged by me, I said. Through my attorney, my accountant, and my business manager. The Whitmore family has no financial involvement in tonight's celebration. I turned back to the crowd, many of whom were now pulling out their phones to record what was clearly becoming the most dramatic moment in Greenwich social history. For 6 months, Victoria asked me not to mention my work at wedding events. She was embarrassed that her father was just a plumber. She wanted to fit in with her new family's social circle. I understood that. I wanted her to be happy. Victoria's tears were flowing freely now, but not tears of joy. But tonight, she went one step further. She told you all that her father was dead. She introduced a complete stranger as the man who raised her. She erased 26 years of our relationship to maintain her social status. The crowd was restless now. Whispered conversations, shocked expressions, phones recording everything. Preston, I said, addressing Whitmore Sr. directly. You spoke beautifully about family loyalty and doing what's right. You praised the values that shaped Victoria into the woman she is today. But you gave credit to the wrong man. I held up a printed email thread. These are communications between Victoria and wedding planner Melissa Chin. 23 emails over 4 months. Victoria was copied on every message. She knew exactly who was funding her dream wedding. David Chin from the Social Register was recording everything, his photographer capturing the stunned expressions. So now we come to the final payment, I said, addressing Catherine Brooks, but speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. $340,000 to complete tonight's service. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded check. The final payment Catherine needed. The check that would keep the reception running smoothly. The room held its breath. Catherine, I said, as the client whose signature appears on every contract, I have a question. Does this venue provide service to people who are ashamed of their families? Catherine looked trapped. Sir, because I'm not interested in funding a celebration of my own humiliation. I looked at the check in my hands. $340,000, made out to Ashford Estate Catering, signed and ready. Then I tore it in half. The sound of ripping paper carried across the silent room like a gunshot. The contracts are void, I announced. No final payment means no continued service. I believe that's standard hospitality industry practice. Victoria screamed. Not a cry of surprise, a full-throated scream of panic and rage. You can't do this, she shouted. This is my wedding. Yes, I said calmly. It was. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then chaos erupted. Victoria launched herself toward the stage, her $32,000 gown trailing behind her like a silk accusation. Daddy, you can't. Please, there has to be another way. But there wasn't another way. That's what she'd never understood about business. When you make certain choices, you eliminate certain options. When you burn bridges, you can't walk back across them. Preston 3 grabbed my arm. You're insane. You can't destroy my wife's wedding over some petty grudge. It's not a grudge, I said, shaking off his grip. It's a lesson in consequences. Catherine Brooks was already on her radio, speaking rapid-fire instructions. Attention all stations. Service suspension in effect immediately. Secure all payments. Contact vendor supervisors. The catering staff began clearing tables with professional efficiency. Servers collected wine glasses from startled guests. The string quartet stopped mid-piece, instruments lowering in confusion. Preston Sr.'s face had gone purple. This is outrageous. I'll have you arrested. I'll sue you for everything you're worth. On what grounds? Richard Polson stepped forward, briefcase still open. My client fulfilled his contractual obligations. He paid $260,000 upfront. The final payment was contingent on satisfactory service completion. The service was satisfactory. Preston roared. Was it? I asked. Because part of the service I paid for was treating my family with respect. That didn't happen. Dr. Walsh approached the stage, his face grim. Jim, I owe you an apology. I should have said something earlier. No apology needed, James. You're not responsible for my daughter's choices. But other guests were reacting differently. I heard fragments of heated conversations. Despicable behavior. How could she do that to her own father? The Whitmores should have known. $500,000. David Chin from the Social Register was interviewing guests, his photographer capturing every moment of the collapse. This wouldn't just be local gossip. It would be documented. Published. Permanent. Victoria collapsed into a chair, her perfect wedding dress pooling around her like spilled champagne. 26 years, she sobbed. You're throwing away 26 years over one night. I'm not throwing anything away, I said. You already did that when you told 350 people I was dead. The venue was emptying rapidly. Guests gathered their belongings. Some stopping to offer quiet words of support, others eager to escape the family drama. The old money crowd seemed particularly uncomfortable with such raw displays of emotion. Preston Whitmore Sr. made one final attempt at control. Hayes, let's be reasonable. Name your price. Whatever you want. Money, property, business connections. We can work this out. You think this is about money? I asked. Everything's about money. That's where you're wrong. I folded the torn check pieces and put them in my pocket. This is about something you can't buy. Respect. Catherine Brooks approached me one last time. Mr. Hayes, for the record, your account shows the venue rental and initial catering payments were processed successfully. The incomplete final payment voids the extended service agreement, but the facility usage through 10 p.m. remains valid. Professional to the end. Catherine understood contracts. Thank you, Catherine. You and your staff have been excellent. For what it's worth, she said quietly, in 20 years of managing events, I've never seen someone handle dignity under pressure quite like you did tonight. The photographer packed his equipment. The string quartet loaded their instruments. Within 30 minutes, the wedding reception had transformed from elegant celebration to empty ballroom. Victoria sat alone at table 1. Her husband and new in-laws huddled in urgent conversation near the exit. Preston 3 kept glancing at his wife with something that looked like disappointment, maybe even disgust. This wasn't the sophisticated family he'd thought he was marrying into. Richard Morrison, the fake father, had slipped out early, probably recognizing that his role in the evening's deception wouldn't reflect well on his reputation. "Victoria," I said, approaching her table. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Are you happy now? You've ruined everything." "I didn't ruin anything," I said quietly. "I just stopped paying for it." She wiped her nose with a cloth napkin that probably cost more than most people's dinner. 30 years building your precious business, and you destroy it all in one night. My business will be fine. It's built on real relationships with real people who value honest work. But your marriage. I glanced toward the Whitmores, still in heated discussion. That might be a different story. Preston III was gesturing angrily at his father, his voice carrying across the now empty ballroom. "You said you'd handled the financial arrangements. You said everything was covered." "We assumed," Preston Sr. began. "You assumed wrong." Preston III snapped. "Do you have any idea how this looks? My wife's father just publicly humiliated our entire family." Victoria flinched at the word humiliated. "The social register reporter got everything," Preston III continued. "Photos, quotes, financial details. By tomorrow morning, everyone in Greenwich will know we hosted a wedding we couldn't afford to pay for." That was the real wound. Not that Victoria had lied about her family. Rich people lie about inconvenient relatives all the time. The problem was that the lie had been exposed publicly, dramatically, with evidence. In their world, image was everything, and their image was now permanently stained. Richard Pohl's son packed his briefcase. "Jim, legally speaking, you're completely protected. All contracts were properly executed. The payment structure was clearly defined. No court would find fault with your actions." "Thanks, Richard. But personally speaking," he continued, "that was either the bravest thing I've ever seen, or the most devastating. Maybe both." Victoria stood slowly, her dress rustling in the empty ballroom. For a moment, she looked like the little girl who used to wait for me to come home from work, ready to tell me about her day. "I loved you," she said. "Despite everything, I loved you." Past tense. "You just destroyed my marriage before it even started." "No, Victoria. You did that when you chose shame over family. I just made the consequences visible." The Whitmores finished their conference and approached us. Preston III's face was cold, calculating. The romantic groom replaced by a businessman assessing losses. "Victoria," he said, "we need to discuss our options." "What options?" "Damage control, media management, financial restructuring." He glanced at me dismissively. "This situation is manageable, but it will require significant adjustments to our original plans." Even now, he was speaking in corporate euphemisms. Their marriage wasn't wounded. It required adjustments. Their humiliation wasn't devastating. It was manageable. Victoria looked between her husband and her father. For the first time all evening, she seemed to see both men clearly. Preston III represented everything she thought she wanted: status, security, acceptance into a world where appearance mattered more than substance. I represented everything she'd been trying to escape: working-class origins, earned rather than inherited wealth, values that couldn't be bought or borrowed. "I need to think," she said. "Think quickly," Preston III replied. "The longer this story circulates, the harder it becomes to contain." He wasn't asking if she was okay. He wasn't apologizing for his family's role in the deception. He was managing a public relations crisis. Catherine Brooks appeared one final time. "Mr. Hayes, the venue is secured. Your remaining items will be stored safely overnight." "Thank you, Catherine." As we prepared to leave, Victoria called out one last time, "Daddy, will you ever forgive me?" I stopped at the ballroom entrance and looked back at my daughter, standing alone in her wedding dress amid the empty tables and cold chandeliers. "Victoria, forgiveness isn't something you ask for once and receive forever. It's something you earn every day through your choices." "What does that mean?" "It means the next move is yours." The story broke in the Fairfield County Social Register Sunday morning. David Chen's article ran with the headline, "Wedding of the Season Ends in Financial Drama as Bride's Father Cancels Payment." It included photos, quotes, and a detailed breakdown of the evening's costs. By noon, it was everywhere. By evening, it had gone national. Victoria called me at 7 a.m., her voice raw from crying. "It's everywhere, Daddy. Everyone's talking about it. What are people saying? Some are calling you a hero. Others are saying you're vindictive and cruel." She paused. "The Whitmores aren't talking to me. What about Preston? He's evaluating our situation." His words. Evaluating, like she was a business investment that had suddenly become risky. "Victoria," I said. "What did you expect? You built your marriage on lies. Lies have consequences. I know that now." By Monday morning, the financial implications were clear. The Ashford estate was pursuing the Whitmore family for the unpaid balance. Vendors were demanding immediate payment. The wedding industry gossip network had spread the story to every planner, caterer, and venue manager in the tri-state area. Preston Whitmore Sr. called me directly Tuesday afternoon. "Hayes, we need to settle this like gentlemen." "I thought we already did. This publicity is damaging both our families. My business relationships are suffering. My son's marriage is under strain." "That's unfortunate. I'm prepared to offer compensation for the financial inconvenience you experienced." He still didn't understand. After everything, he still thought this was about money. "Preston," I said, "you can't buy your way out of this. Your family participated in erasing me from my daughter's life. Money won't fix that. Then what do you want?" "I want Victoria to decide who she really is, and I want you to stay out of that decision." The social consequences rippled through Greenwich like aftershocks. The Whitmores found themselves disinvited from events. Their charity board positions were quietly restructured. The patriarch's reputation was tainted. But the most significant consequence was within Victoria's marriage. Preston III, it turned out, had married Victoria partly because his family viewed her as a project, a beautiful girl from modest circumstances who could be molded into a proper society wife. The discovery that her circumstances weren't modest at all, and that she'd been willing to lie about her family, undermined everything he thought he knew about her. Margaret Henderson stopped by my office Thursday morning. "Jim, I owe you an apology. When I saw you at that wedding, I should have spoken up immediately." "You don't owe me anything, Margaret." "Yes, I do. We all do. Everyone who worked with you over the years, who knew what kind of man you were, and who stayed silent while they tried to erase you." She wasn't the only one. Dr. Walsh sent a letter. Sarah Chin called personally. Customers who had heard the story reached out to express support. The working-class community that had always known my worth was rallying around the principles I'd defended. But the most interesting response came from unexpected sources. 3 business owners contacted Hayes Property Solutions about potential partnerships. A commercial real estate developer wanted to discuss joint ventures. A regional bank requested a meeting about expanding our property management services. The publicity that was supposed to embarrass me had actually enhanced my professional reputation. Standing up for your principles, even at significant personal cost, was seen as a strength, not a weakness. Victoria and Preston III attended marriage counseling for 2 weeks before he filed for annulment. His grounds: fraudulent misrepresentation of family background and financial status. Legal documents that would become part of the public record, ensuring Victoria's deception followed her forever. She moved back to her Manhattan apartment, the one I'd been paying for. For the first time in months, she was truly alone with the consequences of her choices. Friday evening, she called again. "The annulment papers came through today." "I'm sorry to hear that. Are you really, Victoria?" "I never wanted your marriage to fail. I wanted it to be built on truth." "Well, now I have nothing. No husband, no family, no reputation. You have the same thing you've always had, the choice to be who you really are instead of who you think people want you to be. And if I make that choice, if I stop being ashamed of where I came from, then maybe we can start rebuilding what we lost. It's only too late when one of us stops breathing. Until then, there's always tomorrow." The line went quiet for a long moment. "I'll think about it," she finally said. That's all I've ever asked for. 6 weeks later, Victoria knocked on my office door. Not my home, my office. Hayes Property Solutions. Building A, Suite 101. The headquarters of the business empire she'd been too ashamed to acknowledge. She looked different. Simpler. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail instead of an elaborate updo. She wore jeans and a sweater instead of designer clothes. Most importantly, her expression had changed. The artificial sophistication was gone, replaced by something I hadn't seen in years: genuine uncertainty. "Hi, Daddy." "Hello, Victoria. Can we talk?" I gestured to the chair across from my desk. The same desk where I'd planned her wedding payments. The same chair where she'd sat as a teenager, complaining about homework while I finished paperwork. "How are you doing?" I asked. "Honestly? Terrible. The annulment made the papers. I lost my job at the gallery. Too much negative publicity. Most of my friends from the Whitmore circle won't return my calls." "I am sorry to hear that, but also relieved. Do you know how exhausting it is to pretend to be someone else every day? To monitor every word, every gesture, every opinion, to make sure it fits the image you're supposed to project." I waited. She needed to say this in her own words, at her own pace. "I've been thinking about what you said, about earning forgiveness through daily choices." She looked around my office, taking in the awards on the walls, the photos of completed projects, the evidence of 3 decades of honest work. "I want to make different choices now." "What kind of choices?" "I want to work. Real work. Not managing social events or picking out flowers for charity galas. I want to learn the business that built everything I took for granted." I studied her face, looking for signs of performance or manipulation. But what I saw was exhaustion mixed with determination. The look of someone who'd hit bottom and decided to climb back up. "The business isn't glamorous, Victoria. It's early mornings and difficult customers and problems that don't have elegant solutions." "I know. I've been reading about property management, about commercial leasing, about building maintenance. I'm not asking for a handout. I'm asking for a chance to prove I can contribute something real." "What about your trust fund lifestyle?" "Your Manhattan apartment." I gave up the apartment. "I'm staying at an extended stay hotel until I can afford something modest." She managed a weak smile. "Turns out when your father cuts off your funding and your husband annuls your marriage, you learn about budgets pretty quickly." For the first time in months, I felt something I'd thought was permanently lost: pride in my daughter. "There's a junior position open in our residential services division. Customer service, some basic project coordination. It pays $38,000 a year. That's more than I've ever earned in my life. It's also more than most people your age earn without experience. But you'd be starting at the bottom. Reporting to managers who are younger than you. Dealing with customers who might recognize you from the newspaper coverage." "I understand." "Do you? Because this isn't about redemption or making up for past mistakes. This is about whether you genuinely want to build something worthwhile, or whether you're just looking for another form of security." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. 6 months ago, I would have said I wanted security. But security based on pretense isn't really security at all. It's just delayed disappointment. She met my eyes directly. "I want to build something real. Even if it's small. Even if it takes years. The job starts Monday, 8 a.m. Dress code is business casual, not country club casual. I'll be there." As she stood to leave, Victoria paused at the door. "Daddy, thank you for the job. For teaching me that self-respect isn't something you can inherit or marry into. It's something you have to earn. Now you're starting to understand what I've been trying to tell you your whole life." She smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her since she was 16, and walked out to begin the hardest work she'd ever done, becoming someone she could be proud of. This whole journey, it was a brutal way to teach a lesson, to be sure. But sometimes, when everything else fails, the truth, no matter how painful, is the only path to real growth. It taught me about my own resilience, and it taught Victoria about the difference between what glitters and what truly shines. So, I have to ask you, what would you have done in my place? Would you have stayed silent, or would you have torn up that check? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I really want to hear them.